The DNA test confirmed my worst nightmare. Dr. Arnold Jameson wasn't just my fertility doctor, he was my daughter's biological father. But as I sat in that sterile laboratory office, staring at the genetic evidence of his violation, I smiled. Because I had discovered something far more devastating than his betrayal of my trust. I had uncovered a decades-long conspiracy that would expose him as the biological father of 63 children across 4 states, destroy his medical empire worth millions, and send him to federal prison for the rest of his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Scarlett Miles, and 6 months ago I was living what I thought was a fairy tale ending to years of heartbreak. At 34, I'm a forensic accountant specializing in healthcare fraud, a detail that would prove more crucial than I could have ever imagined. My husband Justin and I had endured 5 devastating years of infertility, 3 miscarriages, and 2 failed IVF attempts at different clinics before we found Dr. Arnold Jameson at the prestigious Pacific Coast Fertility Institute in San Diego. Dr. Jameson was fertility medicine royalty, featured on magazine covers, invited to speak at international conferences, and boasting success rates that seemed almost miraculous. Celebrities flew in from around the world for his treatments. The waiting list stretched 8 months, but we felt blessed when a last-minute cancellation got us an appointment after just 6 weeks of waiting. From our first consultation, Dr. Jameson exuded the kind of confidence that desperate couples cling to. Tall, distinguished with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, he spoke about conception like an artist discussing his masterpiece. "Mrs. Miles," he said during our initial meeting, studying my charts with theatrical intensity, "I've reviewed your history, and I can see exactly why previous treatments failed. You weren't receiving the caliber of care you deserved. With the right approach, my approach, I guarantee you'll be pregnant within 3 cycles. The guarantee should have been our first red flag. No ethical fertility doctor promises success, but after years of disappointment, we heard only hope in his words." Dr. Jameson's prediction proved unnervingly accurate. After years of failed attempts elsewhere, I conceived on our very first IVF cycle at his clinic. The pregnancy progressed flawlessly, textbook perfect, as Dr. Jameson proudly noted during each monitoring appointment. He seemed personally invested in my success, scheduling follow-ups himself rather than delegating to his staff, always asking detailed questions about my symptoms and development. "This is exactly what I expected," he would say, reviewing my ultrasounds with obvious satisfaction. "Superior genetic material produces superior results." Our daughter Ruby was born healthy and beautiful, with striking blue eyes that seemed familiar yet impossible to place. She was our miracle baby, the child we'd dreamed of for half a decade. Justin and I felt like we'd won the lottery, and Dr. Jameson had been our golden ticket. For 2 years we lived in blissful gratitude. Ruby was developing ahead of schedule, walking early, speaking in complex sentences before 18 months, displaying an intelligence that amazed our pediatrician. We credited good genetics from both sides of our family and considered ourselves incredibly fortunate. The cracks in our perfect world began with something seemingly innocent: Ruby's enrollment in a prestigious preschool that required comprehensive health records and genetic screening for certain hereditary conditions. "Mrs. Miles, we need to discuss Ruby's genetic screening results," Dr. Patricia Erickson, the pediatric geneticist, said during what should have been a routine consultation. Her tone carried an unusual gravity that immediately set my nerves on edge. "Is something wrong with Ruby?" Justin asked, reaching for my hand across the sterile consultation room table. "Ruby is perfectly healthy," Dr. Erickson assured us quickly, "but there's an anomaly in her genetic profile that we need to address. The paternity markers don't align with Mr. Miles' DNA sample." The room seemed to tilt, Justin's face went pale, and I felt my carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. "What exactly does that mean?" I managed to ask. "It means that biologically Mr. Miles is not Ruby's father," Dr. Erickson explained gently. "This sometimes happens with assisted reproduction. There can be laboratory errors, sample mix-ups, or administrative mistakes. We'll need to investigate the source of the discrepancy." My forensic accounting mind immediately shifted into analytical mode, even as my heart shattered. "What can you tell us about Ruby's biological father based on the genetic markers?" Dr. Erickson consulted her notes. "Male, Northern European descent, approximately 6 feet tall, likely highly educated based on certain genetic indicators we associate with multi-generational academic families, blue eyes, specific blood type markers, and some unusual genetic signatures that suggest possible medical training in the family line. The description hit me like a physical blow. Arnold Jameson was 6'2", had piercing blue eyes, came from a family of physicians, and fit every detail of the genetic profile perfectly. That night, as Justin slept fitfully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, piecing together fragments that suddenly formed a terrifying picture. Dr. Jameson's unusual personal involvement in my case, his confidence about conception success, his proprietary interest in Ruby's development, the way he studied her during our follow-up appointments with something that went beyond professional pride. Ruby's striking blue eyes, identical to Dr. Jameson's. I crept into Ruby's nursery and studied her sleeping face with new eyes. The shape of her nose, the set of her jaw, the way her hair grew in a distinctive cowlick, all features I'd attributed to distant relatives but now recognized with sickening clarity. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting Dr. Jameson or collapsing into victimhood, I would use every skill I'd developed as a forensic accountant to investigate the man who had violated my trust in the most intimate way possible. I had access to medical billing databases through my work with healthcare fraud cases. I understood how to trace financial patterns, identify anomalies, and build comprehensive evidence files. If Dr. Jameson had done this to us, logic suggested we weren't his only victims. What I discovered over the following weeks would reveal a conspiracy so vast and calculated that it defied comprehension. Dr. Arnold Jameson hadn't just violated my family, he had been systematically deceiving couples for over 15 years, using his own genetic material to father dozens of children while charging desperate families hundreds of thousands of dollars for the privilege of raising his offspring without their knowledge. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. As I began mapping the scope of his deception, I would learn that Dr. Jameson had been tracking his biological children, maintaining secret files on their development, and planning something that would make his initial violations seem almost benign by comparison. The war for truth was about to begin, and I had no intention of losing. Looking back now, I realized that Dr. Arnold Jameson had been weaving his web of deception around our family long before Ruby was even conceived. But in those blissful early days, when we thought we'd finally found our miracle worker, every red flag appeared to us as evidence of his exceptional care and expertise. The Pacific Coast Fertility Institute occupied an entire floor of a gleaming medical tower overlooking La Jolla Cove. Everything about the clinic screamed success and exclusivity, from the marble reception desk to the original artwork adorning the walls. Fresh orchids were delivered daily, and the waiting room felt more like a luxury hotel lobby than a medical facility. Dr. Jameson had spared no expense in creating an environment that justified his premium prices. "Welcome to your new beginning," the receptionist had told us during our first visit, handing us leather-bound folders embossed with the clinic's logo. Inside were testimonials from grateful parents, Dr. Jameson's impressive credentials, and success stories that read like fairy tales. One couple had tried for 12 years before Dr. Jameson gave them twins. Another woman had suffered 7 miscarriages before delivering a healthy baby under his care. Justin squeezed my hand as we read through the testimonials. "This is it, Scarlett," he whispered. "This is finally going to work." I wanted so desperately to believe him. At 32, I felt like my biological clock was deafening, and my career success felt hollow compared to the emptiness in our spare bedroom that should have been a nursery. We'd already spent over $200,000 on fertility treatments, depleting our savings and taking out a second mortgage on our Carlsbad home. Dr. Jameson's initial consultation lasted nearly 2 hours, far longer than any previous doctor had spent with us. He reviewed every detail of our medical history with the intensity of a detective solving a case. When he examined my previous test results, he made small disapproving sounds that made me feel like I'd been receiving substandard care for years. "Mrs. Miles, your previous doctors completely missed the underlying issue," he said, spreading my charts across his massive mahogany desk. "They were treating symptoms, not causes. With your egg quality and your husband's motility issues, you needed a much more sophisticated approach." He explained his proprietary treatment protocol with scientific terminology that went over our heads but sounded impressively advanced. Advanced genetic screening, personalized hormone therapy, enhanced laboratory techniques that weren't available at other clinics. Everything was cutting edge, exclusive, and expensive. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My success rates speak for themselves, Dr. Jameson said, pulling up statistics on his computer screen. 87% pregnancy rate for women under 35, 73% for women your age. Compare that to the industry standard of 45% and you'll understand why couples travel internationally for my services. Those numbers should have raised questions. No fertility clinic achieves success rates that dramatically above industry standards, but desperation has a way of silencing rational skepticism, and we heard only hope in his impossible promises. The financial commitment was staggering, $65,000 for a 3-cycle package with additional costs for genetic testing, specialized medications, and enhanced laboratory services. Dr. Jameson's billing coordinator, a polished woman named Ginger Abernathy, made the payment process feel like a luxury transaction rather than a medical expense. Dr. Jameson's patients consider this an investment in their family's future, she explained as we signed contracts that would drain our remaining savings. Most couples tell us it's the best money they ever spent. The treatment protocol itself felt like joining an exclusive club. Dr. Jameson saw only a select number of patients each month, personally overseeing every aspect of their care. We had his private cell phone number for emergencies. He conducted all our ultrasounds himself rather than delegating to technicians. During procedures, he maintained a running commentary about the exceptional quality of my eggs and the optimized laboratory conditions that would ensure success. "This is going beautifully, Scarlett," he would say during egg retrieval procedures, his voice filled with professional satisfaction. "Everything is developing exactly as I predicted. You're going to be an exceptional mother." His confidence was intoxicating. After years of disappointment and clinical language about unexplained infertility, Dr. Jameson spoke about our pregnancy as an inevitable outcome rather than a hopeful possibility. He scheduled our first ultrasound appointment 6 weeks after transfer with complete certainty that we'd need it. When that ultrasound confirmed a healthy pregnancy, Justin and I wept with relief and gratitude. Dr. Jameson observed our tears with obvious pleasure, making notes in my file that went beyond standard medical documentation. "This is why I became a fertility specialist," he said, watching our emotional reaction. "Creating families, making dreams come true. There's no more rewarding work in medicine." Throughout my pregnancy, Dr. Jameson's involvement remained unusually personal. He called personally to check on my symptoms between appointments. He recommended specific prenatal vitamins available only through his clinic. He even suggested a particular obstetrician. Dr. Hendricks Abernathy, who happened to be Ginger's husband and shared Dr. Jameson's philosophy about optimized prenatal care. "I want to ensure continuity of excellence throughout your pregnancy," Dr. Jameson explained. "Dr. Abernathy understands my approach and will monitor the pregnancy with the same attention to detail that achieved this success." Ruby's birth was everything we'd dreamed of, a healthy, beautiful baby girl who arrived exactly on her due date after a textbook labor. A textbook labor. Jameson visited us in the hospital, bringing an elaborate flower arrangement and spending nearly an hour examining Ruby with what we interpreted as professional pride. "She's absolutely perfect," he said, studying her tiny features with intense focus. "Superior genetic expression, optimal development patterns. This is exactly what I expected to see." He took several photographs of Ruby for our success gallery and asked detailed questions about her feeding patterns, sleep schedule, and early reflexes. At the time, we assumed this was part of his thorough follow-up care. Looking back, I realize he was documenting the early development of his biological child. For 2 years, we lived in grateful bliss. Dr. Jameson sent Ruby birthday cards and holiday gifts. He called periodically to check on her development milestones. When Ruby began walking at 10 months and speaking in full sentences before 18 months, Dr. Jameson's pleasure seemed almost paternal. "Exceptional children come from exceptional beginnings," he told us during Ruby's first birthday party, which he attended despite having hundreds of patients. "You're witnessing the results of optimized conception and superior genetic material." We framed those words and hung them in Ruby's nursery, never imagining the horrifying truth they contained. The genetic testing appointment that shattered our world began as routine paperwork for Ruby's enrollment at Montessori Academy of La Jolla. The prestigious preschool required comprehensive health records and genetic screening to ensure they could accommodate any special needs or hereditary conditions. What should have been a simple formality became the moment our entire reality crumbled. Dr. Patricia Erickson's genetics office occupied a corner of Children's Hospital with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Balboa Park. The space felt more like a counseling office than a medical facility: soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and carefully chosen artwork designed to ease difficult conversations. As a genetic counselor specializing in reproductive medicine, Dr. Erickson had delivered her share of devastating news to unsuspecting families. "The good news is that Ruby is perfectly healthy," Dr. Erickson began, opening Ruby's file across her desk. "Her genetic profile shows no markers for the hereditary conditions we typically screen for in fertility patients. She's developing beautifully." Justin and I exchanged relieved smiles. After years of medical anxiety, hearing that our daughter was healthy felt like the ultimate victory. "However," Dr. Erickson continued, her tone shifting to something more cautious, "there's an anomaly in the paternity analysis that we need to discuss." The word anomaly hit me like a physical blow. In my work as a forensic accountant, anomalies were never innocent mistakes, they were evidence of deliberate deception. "What kind of anomaly?" I asked, my professional instincts overriding my maternal panic. Dr. Erickson pulled out a detailed genetic report, pointing to specific markers highlighted in yellow. "These chromosomal markers indicate that Mr. Miles is not Ruby's biological father. The Y chromosome analysis shows no genetic relationship between Ruby and the DNA sample we have on file for Mr. Miles." The room felt like it was spinning. Justin's face went completely white, and I watched him struggle to process what he'd just heard. "That's impossible," he said quietly. "We used my sperm for the IVF. I provided the sample myself." "I understand this is shocking," Dr. Erickson said gently. "Unfortunately, this situation occurs more often than people realize in assisted reproduction. There can be laboratory errors, sample contamination, administrative mix-ups during the fertilization process." My mind immediately shifted into investigative mode. "What can you tell us about Ruby's actual biological father based on these genetic markers?" Dr. Erickson consulted her detailed analysis. "The paternal genetic profile indicates Northern European ancestry, specifically Scandinavian and Germanic lineage, height estimate between 6 feet and 6'3". The educational markers suggest multiple generations of higher education, possibly medical or scientific training. Blood type O positive. And there are some unusual genetic signatures that we typically see in families with extensive medical backgrounds." Each detail felt like another nail in my coffin of denial. Dr. Arnold Jameson was 6'2" with Norwegian and German heritage. His family had produced physicians for 4 generations. He was O positive. I remembered seeing it on his medical license displayed in his office. "Can you determine anything else?" I pressed, needing more concrete evidence before I could accept the horrible truth forming in my mind. "There's one more thing," Dr. Erickson said, hesitating slightly. "The genetic markers show some very specific traits that are quite rare. A particular combination of eye color genes that produces an unusual shade of blue and a distinctive hair texture pattern. These aren't common characteristics which might help identify the biological father if this was indeed a laboratory error." Ruby's piercing blue eyes, identical to Dr. Jameson's distinctive shade that I'd always found so mesmerizing. Her hair had the same unusual texture as his, thick and slightly wavy in a pattern that now seemed sickeningly familiar. "We'll need to investigate this through your fertility clinic," Dr. Erickson continued. "They'll have records of all samples used during your IVF cycle. This could be resolved fairly quickly if it was a simple mix-up." But even as she spoke about administrative errors and laboratory mistakes, I knew with growing certainty that what had happened to us was neither accidental nor isolated. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. "Dr. Erickson," I said carefully, "in your experience with fertility cases, have you seen this type of situation before?" Her expression grew more serious. "Occasionally. Usually it involves laboratory contamination or mislabeled samples. But there have been some cases," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "There have been instances where fertility doctors have used their own genetic material without patient consent. It's extremely rare, but it has happened." The clinical language couldn't soften the horror of what she was suggesting. How would we determine if that's what happened here? "We would need to test Ruby's DNA against the suspected individual," Dr. Erickson explained. "If you have concerns about your fertility doctor, we could request a voluntary DNA sample for comparison. Most reputable physicians would cooperate with such a request to clear their name." Justin finally found his voice. "And if they refuse?" Then we would know we're dealing with something more serious than a laboratory error, Dr. Erickson said grimly. In cases of suspected medical misconduct, there are legal avenues to compel DNA testing. I felt a cold determination settling over me. What would be our next steps? I'd recommend starting with a formal inquiry to the Pacific Coast Fertility Institute. Request a complete review of your IVF cycle, including documentation of all genetic material used. If Dr. Jameson has nothing to hide, he should welcome the opportunity to clear up this confusion. But I already knew Dr. Jameson wouldn't welcome any investigation. The man who had guaranteed my pregnancy, who had taken such personal interest in Ruby's development, who had spoken so confidently about superior genetic material, he wasn't going to cooperate with anything that might expose his crimes. As we left Dr. Erickson's office, Justin grabbed my hand in the parking lot. "Scarlett, what if it's true? What if he really did this to us?" I looked at my husband, this good, trusting man who had spent years supporting me through fertility treatments, who had watched me carry another man's child while believing she was his own daughter. The rage building inside me wasn't just about the violation of my body or the theft of our genetic legacy, it was about the deliberate, calculated deception of a man who had sworn an oath to do no harm. "If it's true," I said quietly, "then Dr. Arnold Jameson has no idea who he's been playing with. He picked the wrong woman to deceive." That night, after Justin fell into an exhausted sleep, I sat at my computer and began what would become the most important investigation of my career. If Dr. Jameson had violated our trust, if he had used his own sperm to impregnate me without consent, then I was going to uncover every detail of his deception and make him pay for every single lie. I started with the basics: Dr. Jameson's medical license, his educational background, his professional history. But what I found in those first few hours of research would be nothing compared to the systematic fraud I would uncover over the following weeks. The war had begun, and Dr. Arnold Jameson was about to discover that he had chosen the wrong forensic accountant to victimize. The conversation with Justin that would define our path forward happened at 2:47 a.m., 3 days after the genetic counseling session. I'd been lying awake, staring at the ceiling while my mind raced through possibilities and implications. When Justin finally spoke into the darkness, his voice was hollow but determined. "I keep thinking about what Ruby will ask us someday," he said quietly. "When she's old enough to understand genetics, to wonder why she doesn't look like me. What do we tell her?" I turned to face my husband in the dim light filtering through our bedroom curtains. "We tell her the truth, that her father loved her enough to fight for justice when she couldn't fight for herself." Justin sat up, and I could see the exact moment when his devastation transformed into resolve. "You think Dr. Jameson did this deliberately, don't you? This wasn't a laboratory mistake. Everything about his behavior suggests intentional deception," I said, my forensic training taking over. The personal involvement, the confidence guarantees, the way he studied Ruby like she was his own experiment. Nobody makes that many mistakes by accident. We moved to the kitchen, spreading Ruby's genetic report across the granite island like battle plans. Under the bright pendant lights, the clinical language seemed even more damning. Justin made coffee while I pulled out my laptop and began explaining what I'd discovered during my preliminary research. "I've been investigating Dr. Jameson's professional history," I said, turning the screen toward Justin. "His medical license shows no disciplinary actions, but there are some interesting patterns in his practice evolution." I'd spent hours tracking Dr. Jameson's career trajectory through medical board databases, professional publications, and clinic websites. The Pacific Coast Fertility Institute had been established 12 years ago, after Dr. Jameson left a larger practice in Los Angeles, under circumstances that were difficult to determine from public records. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a graph I'd created tracking his reported success rates over time. His pregnancy rates started normal when he opened the clinic, then began climbing dramatically after year 3. By year 5, he was reporting success rates that are statistically impossible through conventional methods. Justin studied the data with the same analytical mind that made him successful in software development. What changed in year 3? That's when he stopped working with other fertility specialists and began handling all procedures personally, I explained. He also implemented what he calls proprietary laboratory protocols that he doesn't share with other clinics or medical conferences. The pattern was becoming clear. Dr. Jameson had isolated his practice, eliminated oversight from colleagues, and created an environment where he could operate without scrutiny. His exceptional success rates weren't the result of superior technique, they were the result of using his own genetic material to guarantee pregnancies. Scarlett, Justin said slowly, if he did this to us, how many other families has he deceived? That question had been haunting me for 3 days. Based on his patient volume and success rates, potentially dozens of families. Maybe more. Justin's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Dozens of children who think they know who their father is but don't. Dozens of men who believe they're raising their own biological children. And dozens of women who were violated without their knowledge or consent, I added quietly. The magnitude of the potential conspiracy was staggering. We weren't just dealing with one violated family. We might be looking at the largest fertility fraud case in California history. What do we do? Justin asked. I'd been formulating a plan since leaving Dr. Erickson's office. We investigate systematically and build an ironclad case before we make any accusations. Jameson has been doing this for years. He's careful and probably has legal protections in place. We need overwhelming evidence. I explained my professional background and how my skills in forensic accounting could be applied to medical fraud investigation. I had access to insurance databases that could reveal billing patterns, success rate anomalies, and patient demographics. I understood how to trace financial flows and identify systematic deception. But I can't do this alone, I continued. I need your analytical skills for pattern recognition, and we need to be strategic about how we approach this. If Dr. Jameson suspects we're investigating him, he could destroy evidence or disappear. Justin nodded slowly. What's our first step? We start with Ruby's DNA, I said. We need definitive proof that Dr. Jameson is her biological father before we investigate further. Once we have that confirmation, we begin mapping the scope of his deception. I'd already researched private DNA testing services that could provide the conclusive evidence we needed. A simple saliva sample from Dr. Jameson compared to Ruby's genetic profile would resolve any remaining doubt. How do we get his DNA without him knowing? Justin asked. I've been thinking about that, I replied. Dr. Jameson is scheduled to speak at the San Diego Medical Association dinner next month. It's a public event where he'll be eating and drinking. Getting a DNA sample from a discarded glass or utensil shouldn't be difficult. Justin was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of what I was suggesting. This feels like we're crossing a line into something that could get us in legal trouble. Dr. Jameson crossed a line when he violated my body and deceived our family. I said firmly. Everything we're planning is legal. We're gathering evidence of potential medical fraud and sexual assault. If anything, we're doing what law enforcement should be doing. The decision to move forward wasn't made in that moment. It evolved over the following hour as we discussed possibilities, risks, and moral obligations. By dawn, we had agreed on our approach: methodical investigation, documented evidence gathering, and strategic patience until we had built an unassailable case. One more thing, Justin said as we finally prepared to return to bed. What if we're wrong? What if this really was just a laboratory error? I considered his question seriously. Then we'll have learned the truth about Ruby's parentage and can move forward with that knowledge. But Justin, I don't think we're wrong. Every instinct I've developed as an investigator tells me that Dr. Arnold Jameson is a predator who has been systematically deceiving families for years. As I tucked Ruby into her crib that morning, watching her sleep peacefully in the soft morning light, I made a silent promise. Whether she was Justin's biological daughter or not, she was our child, and we would protect her from the man who had violated our trust and stolen our choices. The investigation was about to begin. My investigation into Dr. Arnold Jameson began at 5:30 a.m. the next morning, while Ruby slept and Justin prepared for work. I'd positioned myself at our home office desk with 3 monitors, several databases open, and a legal pad covered in preliminary notes. What I discovered over the following 6 hours would transform my suspicion into horrifying certainty. The healthcare fraud detection software I used professionally gave me access to insurance claim patterns across multiple carriers. I started by analyzing Pacific Coast Fertility Institute's billing history over the past 12 years, looking for anomalies that might indicate systematic deception. The first red flag emerged within 30 minutes. Dr. Jameson's clinic showed an unusual pattern of billing for advanced genetic testing and specialized laboratory procedures that were rarely performed at other fertility clinics. More concerning, these expensive add-on services were almost exclusively billed for patients classified as severe male factor infertility, cases where the husband's sperm quality was supposedly so poor that conception would be nearly impossible. I cross-referenced these billing patterns with success rates reported to the California Department of Public Health. The numbers were staggering and statistically impossible. For patients with severe male factor infertility, industry standards show pregnancy rates of approximately 15 to 25%. Dr. Jameson's clinic reported success rates of 89% for this same population. That's not medically possible, I whispered to myself, staring at the data. No fertility intervention could achieve those results with genuinely compromised male fertility. The only way to guarantee such success rates would be to use different genetic material entirely. I began building a database of Dr. Jameson's patients by cross-referencing insurance claims with birth records from San Diego County. The pattern that emerged was chilling in its consistency. Over the past 12 years, Dr. Jameson had treated 847 couples for infertility. Of those, 234 cases were classified as severe male factor infertility, and of those 234 cases, 208 had resulted in successful pregnancies, an 89% success rate that defied medical explanation. But the most disturbing discovery came when I started analyzing the birth records of children born to Dr. Jameson's patients. Using public records and cross-referencing with social media photos that parents had shared publicly, I began to notice physical similarities among children born to completely unrelated families. I created a digital photo board, organizing pictures by birth year and physical characteristics. The pattern became undeniable. Dozens of children shared the same distinctive blue eyes, the same unusual hair texture, the same facial structure. They looked like siblings, not random children born to different parents. My phone rang, interrupting my concentration. It was Justin, calling from his office downtown. "I've been thinking about what you're doing," he said without preamble. "I want to help. I've been researching Dr. Jameson's background, and there are some things you need to know." "What did you find?" I asked, saving my work and switching to speakerphone. I tracked down his previous employment before opening the Pacific Coast Clinic. He left Reproducor Health Associates in Los Angeles after what the medical board records describe as administrative disagreements with practice protocols. The details are sealed, but I found a former employee willing to talk off the record. My pulse quickened. "What did they tell you?" Dr. Jennifer Walsh worked as a laboratory technician at RHA when Dr. Jameson was there. She left medicine entirely after what happened, but she agreed to meet with me for coffee. "Scarlett," she said, "there were rumors about Dr. Jameson even then. Laboratory samples going missing, unusually high pregnancy rates for his patients specifically, and concerns about protocol violations that the practice administrators investigated but never made public." Did she have any proof? No concrete evidence, but she remembered specific incidents. Samples labeled with one patient name but containing genetic material that didn't match the documented characteristics. When she raised concerns, Dr. Jameson accused her of contaminating specimens and questioned her competence. She was eventually forced out, and Dr. Jameson left shortly after. This corroborated everything I was discovering through data analysis. Dr. Jameson had a history of suspicious behavior that preceded his current practice by years. "There's more," Justin continued. "Dr. Walsh gave me contact information for 2 other former employees who left RHA around the same time. She thinks they might be willing to talk if they understand we're investigating potential medical fraud." I felt the investigation expanding beyond our personal case into something much larger. "Justin, based on what I'm finding in the data, we might be looking at over 200 families who were deceived. This isn't just about Ruby, this could be the largest fertility fraud case in U.S. history." The silence on the phone stretched for several seconds. 200 families, Justin repeated quietly. 200 children who don't know who their real father is. And 200 men who believe they're raising their own biological children when they're actually raising Dr. Jameson's offspring, I added. "We have to expose this," Justin said firmly. "We can't let him keep doing this to other families." I spent the rest of that day refining my analysis and building a comprehensive database of Dr. Jameson's potential victims. The scope was overwhelming. Children ranging in age from newborn to 12 years old, scattered across Southern California but all sharing similar physical characteristics and conception histories. But as I worked, a more disturbing question began forming in my mind. If Dr. Jameson had fathered dozens of children without their family's knowledge, what was his ultimate plan? Was this simply a doctor with a God complex, or was there something more systematic and sinister behind his deception? The answer to that question would prove more horrifying than anything I'd yet discovered. By evening, I had identified 47 families with strong evidence of deception, and preliminary indicators of potentially dozens more. Each family represented a violation, a theft of choice, and children who would eventually need to learn the truth about their origins. As I tucked Ruby into bed that night, I studied her face with new eyes, not just as my beloved daughter, but as potential evidence in what was becoming the most important case of my career. Tomorrow I would begin the delicate process of reaching out to other families and building the coalition that would eventually bring Dr. Arnold Jameson to justice. The scope of his crimes was becoming clear. Now I needed to understand their purpose. Dr. Jennifer Walsh agreed to meet us at a small cafe in Encinitas, 30 miles north of San Diego and far from the medical community where she might be recognized. When she walked through the door, I immediately understood why she'd left medicine entirely. There was a haunted quality to her eyes, the look of someone who'd witnessed something that fundamentally changed her worldview. "I've been waiting 8 years for someone to ask the right questions," she said quietly, settling into our corner booth and declining our offer of coffee. "When Justin told me you were investigating Dr. Jameson for fertility fraud, I knew this day would finally come." Jennifer had worked as a senior laboratory technician at Reproductive Health Associates in Los Angeles from 2012 to 2015, during Dr. Jameson's final years at the practice. As she spoke, I recorded our conversation with her permission, building what would become crucial testimony for our case. "The first time I noticed something wrong was in March 2014, Jennifer began, her voice steady but strained. "I was processing sperm samples for IVF procedures, and I noticed discrepancies in the genetic markers. Samples that were labeled with patient identification numbers showed completely different characteristics than what the intake forms documented." "What kind of discrepancies?" I asked. My forensic training focused on specific details: blood type mismatches, genetic ancestry markers that didn't align with patient backgrounds, motility and count measurements that were dramatically better than the original analysis, she explained. When I brought these concerns to Dr. Jameson, he became defensive and suggested I was making laboratory errors. Jennifer pulled out a folder she'd been carrying, spreading photocopied documents across our table. "I started keeping copies of everything after that conversation. These are laboratory reports showing the discrepancies I documented over 18 months. The evidence was damning. Page after page of genetic analysis reports showing samples that didn't match patient profiles. I could see the systematic pattern that Jennifer had recognized years ago: healthy, genetically superior samples being substituted for compromised ones in cases of severe male factor infertility." "Did you ever directly witness Dr. Jameson tampering with samples?" Justin asked. "Not directly, but I documented suspicious behavior," Jennifer replied, flipping to another section of her file. "Dr. Jameson would often come into the laboratory after hours, claiming he needed to review procedures or check equipment. This was unusual because physicians typically don't handle laboratory work personally. When I checked the logs the next morning, samples would sometimes be missing or relabeled." She showed us security badge records indicating Dr. Jameson's after-hours access to the laboratory, cross-referenced with dates when sample discrepancies occurred. The correlation was too consistent to be coincidental. "The breaking point came in August 2015, Jennifer continued. "I discovered that Dr. Jameson had been maintaining a separate sample storage system that wasn't documented in our official laboratory protocols, hidden freezer units in a storage room that only he had access to." My blood ran cold. What was in those freezer units? Genetic material, dozens of samples that weren't labeled with patient identification. When I confronted Dr. Jameson about the unauthorized storage, he claimed it was for research purposes approved by the clinic administration. But when I checked with the practice partners, they had no knowledge of any research program. Jennifer's voice grew more strained as she recounted the aftermath of her discovery. "Dr. Jameson accused me of violating patient confidentiality by accessing unauthorized areas. He filed a complaint with the practice administration claiming I was unstable and making false accusations. Within 2 weeks, I was placed on administrative leave pending investigation." "What happened to the investigation?" I asked. "It was conducted entirely by practice administrators who were concerned about protecting the clinic's reputation," Jennifer said bitterly. "They concluded that there was no evidence of wrongdoing, but suggested that the working relationship between Dr. Jameson and me had become unproductive. I was offered a severance package in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement." She pulled out the final document in her file, a legal agreement that had silenced her for 8 years. I signed it because I needed the money and couldn't afford the legal battle they threatened if I refused. But I kept copies of everything, hoping that someday someone would be able to use this evidence. Justin and I exchanged glances. The pattern Jennifer described perfectly matched what I'd discovered through data analysis, but her testimony provided the crucial insider perspective that proved systematic deception rather than isolated incidents. Jennifer, in your professional opinion, was Dr. Jameson using his own genetic material to replace patient samples? I asked directly. She nodded slowly. Based on what I observed, that's the only explanation that fits the evidence. The substitute samples all showed similar genetic markers: Northern European ancestry, superior motility and count measurements, identical blood type, and Dr. Jameson's behavior became increasingly protective of laboratory access after I started questioning the discrepancies. Do you know if other staff members were aware of these issues? 2 other laboratory technicians, Ebony Hendricks and Ruby Erickson, documented similar concerns. Ebony left RHA 6 months after I did, also under pressure from Dr. Jameson. Ruby transferred to a different department to avoid working with him directly. I made notes of their names for follow-up interviews. Building a coalition of former employees would strengthen our case immeasurably. There's one more thing you should know, Jennifer said as our meeting concluded. After Dr. Jameson left RHA to start his own practice, I heard rumors from colleagues still working in fertility medicine. His new clinic was reporting success rates that were impossibly high, and other physicians were beginning to ask questions about his methods. What kind of questions? Professional jealousy at first, wondering how he was achieving results that the rest of us couldn't replicate. But gradually, suspicion about whether his techniques were legitimate. The fertility medicine community is small, and word spreads when someone's outcomes are too good to be true. As we prepared to leave, Jennifer grasped my hand across the table. Mrs. Miles, I've carried the guilt of not speaking up for 8 years. I knew Dr. Jameson was deceiving patients, but I let legal threats and financial pressure silence me. If you can expose what he's been doing, you'll be giving justice to dozens of families who deserve the truth. Driving home from Encinitas, Justin and I were quiet for most of the journey, processing the implications of what we'd learned. Jennifer's testimony provided crucial validation of our investigation, but it also revealed the depth of Dr. Jameson's calculated deception and his willingness to destroy careers to protect his secrets. We need to contact Ebony Hendricks and Ruby Erickson, I said finally. If we can build a coalition of former employees willing to testify, we'll have the credibility to approach law enforcement. And we need to be prepared for Dr. Jameson to fight back, Justin added grimly. If he destroyed Jennifer's career for asking questions, imagine what he'll do when he realizes we're building a case against him. That night, as I organized Jennifer's documents and added her testimony to our growing evidence file, I felt the weight of responsibility settling over me. We were no longer just seeking answers about Ruby's parentage. We were building a case that could expose one of the largest medical fraud conspiracies in American history. The investigation was accelerating, and there would be no turning back. The call from Ebony Hendricks came 3 days after our meeting with Jennifer Walsh. I was reviewing insurance fraud patterns when my phone rang, displaying a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice trembled with nervous energy. Mrs. Miles, this is Ebony Hendricks. Jennifer Walsh gave me your number. She said you're investigating Dr. Arnold Jameson. I immediately set aside my work and activated my recording app. Yes, thank you for calling. Jennifer mentioned you worked with Dr. Jameson at Reproductive Health Associates. I did, and what I witnessed there has haunted me for years, Ebony said. When Jennifer told me someone was finally building a case against him, I knew I had to speak up. What he did to those families, what he's probably still doing, it's monstrous. Ebony's voice carried a weight that suggested she had witnessed something even more damaging than Jennifer's laboratory concerns. I could hear papers rustling in the background as if she was consulting notes. I need you to understand something before I tell you what I know, she continued. I left medical technology entirely because of what happened with Dr. Jameson. I couldn't continue working in a field where someone like him could operate freely, but I've been documenting everything, waiting for the right moment to come forward. What exactly did you document? I asked, my forensic instincts focusing on concrete evidence. I was responsible for maintaining patient files and coordinating between the laboratory and clinical staff, Ebony explained. Part of my job involved tracking genetic material from collection through fertilization. That's how I discovered Dr. Jameson's secret protocol. The phrase secret protocol sent chills down my spine. Can you explain what you mean? Dr. Jameson had been running what he called optimization procedures for patients with severe male factor infertility. Officially, these were listed as advanced sperm preparation techniques. But what actually happened was sample substitution on a massive scale. Ebony's revelation confirmed our worst suspicions, but the clinical detail she provided was crucial for building a legal case. How did the substitution process work? Patients would provide samples that were analyzed and documented according to standard protocols, she said. But for cases classified as optimization candidates, Dr. Jameson would personally handle the final preparation. He had access to what he called donor reserves, supposedly anonymous donor samples that were actually his own genetic material. How do you know the donor samples were his? Because I witnessed him providing them, Ebony said quietly. On 3 separate occasions I saw Dr. Jameson collecting samples in his private office after hours. When I asked about the protocol for personal collection, he claimed it was for quality control testing, but those same samples would appear in patient files the next day, labeled as optimized donor material. This was the smoking gun we needed. Direct witness testimony of Dr. Jameson providing his own genetic material for patient procedures. Did you document these incidents? I photographed the sample labels and recorded dates and times, Ebony confirmed. I also maintained copies of patient files showing the substitution pattern. Dr. Jameson was only using his genetic material for specific cases, wealthy patients with poor prognosis who were desperate enough to pay premium fees for guaranteed results. The financial angle added another layer to the conspiracy. Dr. Jameson wasn't just violating patients, he was charging them enormous fees for the privilege of being deceived. Ebony, how many cases did you document? Over 18 months, I recorded 47 instances of sample substitution, all patients classified as severe male factor infertility, all charged for premium optimization procedures, and all achieving pregnancy within 2 cycles. I was frantically taking notes, cross-referencing her timeline with my insurance data analysis. What happened when you tried to report these concerns? I made the mistake of approaching Dr. Jameson directly first, Ebony said, her voice growing bitter. I thought there might be a legitimate explanation. He became furious and accused me of industrial espionage. He claimed I was trying to steal proprietary techniques to sell to competitors. Did you escalate your concerns to practice administration? I tried, but Dr. Jameson had already poisoned that well. He filed a complaint claiming I was mentally unstable and making false accusations due to personal stress. The practice partners were more concerned about potential liability than investigating the truth. This pattern of intimidation and character assassination was becoming clear. Dr. Jameson had systematically silenced anyone who threatened to expose his deception. The final straw came when I discovered he was maintaining detailed files on the children, Ebony continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. What kind of files? Medical records, developmental assessments, even educational progress reports. Dr. Jameson had been tracking every child born through his optimization procedures. He called it longitudinal outcome monitoring, but it was really surveillance of his biological offspring. My blood ran cold. The implications were staggering. Dr. Jameson hadn't just fathered these children, he'd been secretly monitoring their development for years. How was he obtaining this information? Through follow-up consultations that he convinced parents were standard care, Ebony explained. He would schedule wellness checks and developmental assessments, then document everything in his private files. Some parents were so grateful for their successful pregnancies that they welcomed his continued involvement. I thought about Dr. Jameson's ongoing contact with our family, the birthday cards, the developmental questions, his obvious pleasure at Ruby's early achievements. He hadn't been showing professional pride. He'd been monitoring his biological child's progress. Ebony, do you still have copies of these files? I have everything, she said firmly. Patient records, substitution documentation, even some of Dr. Jameson's personal notes about the children. I've been waiting 8 years for someone who could use this evidence properly. Would you be willing to provide testimony and documentation for a legal case? Yes, but I need protection, Ebony replied. Dr. Jameson destroyed my career at RHA, and I can't afford to have him come after me again. If we're going to do this, we need to be strategic and make sure we have enough evidence to protect everyone involved. I understood her concerns completely. Dr. Jameson had proven his willingness to destroy anyone who threatened his operation. But with Ebony's testimony and documentation, Combined with Jennifer's evidence and my financial analysis, we were building a case strong enough to withstand his counterattacks. Ebony, I think it's time we involved law enforcement. With your evidence and what we've already gathered, we have enough to trigger a formal investigation. There's one more thing you need to know, she said. Dr. Jameson wasn't working alone. Ginger Abernathy, his billing coordinator, was fully aware of the substitution procedures. She was the one who created the financial structure that allowed him to charge premium fees for fraudulent services. Another conspirator. The web of deception was larger than we'd realized, involving multiple staff members who had enabled Dr. Jameson's crimes. As our conversation concluded, I felt the investigation reaching a crucial turning point. We had insider testimony, financial evidence, and documented proof of systematic deception spanning years, but we also had confirmation that Dr. Jameson was more dangerous than we'd initially realized, a predator who monitored his victims long after violating them. The time for covert investigation was ending. Soon we would need to take our evidence public and confront the man who had stolen our choices and violated our trust. But first we needed to understand the full scope of his surveillance network and ensure that every affected family would be protected when the truth finally emerged. The breakthrough that revealed the true scope of Dr. Jameson's conspiracy came from an unexpected source, a 17-year-old girl named Emma, who knocked on our front door on a rainy Thursday evening in November. When I opened the door, I found myself staring at a younger version of Ruby, with the same distinctive blue eyes and facial structure that had become hauntingly familiar. "Are you Mrs. Miles?" she asked nervously, clutching a manila folder against her chest. "I think your daughter Ruby might be my half-sister." My heart stopped. Justin appeared behind me and I watched his face go pale as he recognized the unmistakable family resemblance. "Please, come in," I said, guiding her to our living room while my mind raced with implications. Emma introduced herself as Emma Patterson, born in 2006 to parents who had struggled with infertility for 6 years before conceiving through Dr. Jameson's clinic. She was articulate, obviously intelligent, and carried herself with a maturity that suggested she'd been dealing with difficult truths for some time. "I've been investigating my own origins for 2 years," she explained, settling onto our couch and opening her folder. "When I turned 15, I started noticing that I looked nothing like my parents. Different eye color, different build, different facial features. When I asked about it, they admitted they'd used a sperm donor but claimed they didn't know his identity." Justin sat beside me, both of us transfixed by this young woman who represented our worst fears made manifest. "How did you discover Dr. Jameson's involvement?" I asked. "DNA testing," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "I used one of those ancestry websites and connected with dozens of genetic matches who had no connection to my parents' families. But the strange thing was, all my closest matches were children born between 2006 and 2019, and all their parents had used the same fertility clinic." She spread photographs across our coffee table. Children of various ages who all shared unmistakable similarities. "I've been in contact with 12 families so far, all Dr. Jameson's patients. All told they were using anonymous donor sperm, and all raising children who look like siblings." The evidence was overwhelming. Emma had independently discovered and documented what our investigation had revealed through data analysis and insider testimony. But her next revelation was even more shocking. "Mrs. Miles, I think Dr. Jameson has been watching us our entire lives," she said quietly. "All the families I've contacted report the same thing. Regular wellness checks from Dr. Jameson throughout their children's development, educational assessments disguised as follow-up care, even college counseling sessions where he gathered information about our academic achievements." Justin leaned forward. "What kind of information was he gathering?" "Everything," Emma replied, pulling out a thick file. "I convinced my parents to let me see all their correspondence with Dr. Jameson over the years. He's been tracking my grades, extracurricular activities, standardized test scores, even my college application essays, and based on what other families have told me, he's been doing the same thing with all his biological children." The surveillance network was more extensive than we'd imagined. Dr. Jameson hadn't just fathered these children, he'd been conducting a longitudinal study of their development without their knowledge or consent. "Emma, how did you find our family specifically?" I asked. "Your daughter Ruby is mentioned in Dr. Jameson's files," she said, causing my blood to run cold. One of the families I contacted had copies of communications where Dr. Jameson specifically referenced Ruby's early development as an example of optimal genetic expression. That's how I found your name and address." The violation felt even more personal, knowing that Dr. Jameson had been discussing Ruby with other families, using our child as evidence of his genetic superiority. "There's something else," Emma continued, her voice growing more serious. "I think Dr. Jameson is planning something with all this data he's collected. One of the older children I contacted, he's 22 now, said Dr. Jameson had approached him about participating in a genetic research project that would involve meeting other participants and contributing to scientific studies." "What kind of research project?" Justin asked, though I suspected we already knew the answer. "Eugenic research," Emma said bluntly. "Dr. Jameson believes he's created a genetically superior generation, and he wants to study us to prove his theories about human enhancement. Some of the older kids have been invited to what he calls family reunions, gatherings where he can observe interactions between his biological children and document our collective achievements." The full horror of Dr. Jameson's plan was becoming clear. This wasn't just medical fraud or even sexual assault. It was a systematic eugenics experiment using unwitting families as test subjects and their children as lab rats. "Emma, how many children do you think are involved in total?" I asked. "Based on my research and the families I've contacted, probably between 60 and 80 children ranging in age from 3 to 22, she replied. "And Dr. Jameson has been documenting all of us since birth, creating what he calls a generational study of optimized genetics." I felt sick imagining the scope of his violation. Dozens of families believing they were raising their own children while unknowingly participating in a decades-long genetic experiment. "Mrs. Miles, I came to you because the other families said you're building a legal case against Dr. Jameson," Emma continued. "I want to help. We all do. These younger kids deserve to know the truth about their parentage, and Dr. Jameson needs to be stopped before he recruits more families for his experiment." Justin and I exchanged glances. Emma's evidence and testimony would be crucial for exposing the full scope of Dr. Jameson's crimes, but involving a minor in our investigation created additional complications. "Emma, we appreciate your courage in coming forward," I said carefully, "but we need to involve your parents in any formal legal proceedings. This is too important and too dangerous for you to handle alone." "My parents know I'm here," she replied. "They're scared, but they support exposing the truth. They've been living with the guilt of not questioning Dr. Jameson's continued involvement in my life, and they want justice for all the families who were deceived." As Emma prepared to leave that evening, she handed me a business card that made my blood freeze. "One more thing. Dr. Jameson asked me to give this to any families I contacted. He's planning a reunion event next month for all his successful cases and their children." The card advertised a holiday celebration at an upscale resort in La Jolla, described as a gathering for Dr. Jameson's most cherished families to celebrate the miracles we've created together. The language was nauseating in its manipulative sentiment. "He's planning to gather all his victims and their children in one place," Justin said after Emma left. "This could be our chance to expose him publicly and gather evidence from multiple families simultaneously." But as I studied the invitation, a more sinister possibility occurred to me. What if this wasn't just a celebration? What if Dr. Jameson was planning something more elaborate, a final phase of his experiment that required observing all his biological children together? The investigation had revealed a conspiracy far more complex and disturbing than we'd initially imagined. Dr. Jameson wasn't just a doctor who had violated patients. He was a eugenicist who had spent decades orchestrating a genetic experiment using unwitting families as subjects, and now he was planning to bring all his victims together under one roof. The financial complexity of Dr. Jameson's fraud scheme became clear when I gained access to his complete billing records through a contact at the California Department of Insurance. What I discovered was a sophisticated operation that had defrauded insurance companies, patients, and government programs out of nearly $12 million over 15 years. Working late into the night while Justin and Ruby slept, I mapped the intricate web of financial deception that had funded Dr. Jameson's genetic experiment. The Pacific Coast Fertility Institute wasn't just a medical practice, it was a criminal enterprise designed to maximize profits from desperate families while conducting unauthorized research. The first layer of fraud involved inflated billing for procedures that were never performed. Dr. Jameson routinely charged patients for advanced genetic testing, sperm preparation techniques, and specialized laboratory services that existed only on paper. When patients used his own genetic material, he still billed for expensive donor screening and preparation services that were completely fabricated. But the deeper fraud was more sinister. Dr. Jameson had created multiple shell companies to hide the true scope of his operation. Pacific Coast Research Institute, Genetic Advancement Laboratory, and Reproductive Excellence Foundation were all registered to the same address as his clinic, allowing him to funnel money between entities and claim research expenses that were actually personal enrichment. I traced payments flowing from insurance companies through these shell entities into Dr. Jameson's personal accounts. The pattern was clear. He was double billing for services, claiming research grants that didn't exist, and charging premium prices for procedures he wasn't actually performing. My phone rang at 2:47 a.m. It was Emma Patterson, calling from her parents' home with information that would add another devastating layer to our case. "Mrs. Miles, I've been going through my parents' financial records," Emma said, her voice tight with anger. Dr. Jameson didn't just deceive them about using donor sperm. He charged them for genetic testing and counseling services that never happened. "What do you mean?" I asked, setting aside my spreadsheets to focus on her discovery. "My parents paid $18,000 for something called advanced donor genetic screening," Emma explained. According to their receipts, this included comprehensive genetic analysis, psychological evaluation of the donor, and detailed family medical history. But since Dr. Jameson was the donor, none of that testing ever occurred. This confirmed what I was seeing in the billing patterns. Dr. Jameson had created elaborate service packages that justified enormous fees while delivering nothing but his own genetic material. "Emma, do your parents have documentation of all their payments?" "Everything," she replied, "and I've been talking to the other families I found. We're all seeing the same patterns: charges for services that couldn't have been provided, genetic counseling sessions that never happened, and donor fees for anonymous donors who were actually Dr. Jameson himself." I was furiously taking notes, adding Emma's family's financial information to my growing database of fraud evidence. "How much did your parents pay in total?" $87,000 over 2 years, Emma said, her voice hollow. "They took out a second mortgage to afford Dr. Jameson's treatments, believing they were paying for the best possible care. Instead, they were funding his genetic experiment while he violated my mother without her consent." The human cost of Dr. Jameson's crimes was staggering. Families had bankrupted themselves to afford treatments that were essentially elaborate lies designed to cover systematic deception. "There's something else," Emma continued. "I found correspondence between Dr. Jameson and someone called Patrick Hendricks at something called the Genetic Advancement Laboratory. They were discussing research protocols and data collection procedures that sound like they were planning to expand the operation." Patrick Hendricks, possibly related to Ginger Abernathy, whose married name was Hendricks according to our earlier research. The conspiracy was involving family members and expanding beyond the fertility clinic. "Emma, can you send me copies of that correspondence?" "I'm scanning everything now," she replied. "But Mrs. Miles, there's something in these emails that's really disturbing. Dr. Jameson wrote about Phase 2 implementation and expanding the subject pool to include international markets. I think he was planning to take this operation global." The scope of Dr. Jameson's ambitions was growing more horrifying by the hour. This wasn't just a local medical fraud, it was a planned expansion into international genetic manipulation. Over the following days, I worked with Emma and several other affected families to build a comprehensive financial picture of Dr. Jameson's fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. Systematic billing fraud totaling $11.7 million over 15 years, shell companies used to launder money and hide research activities, fabricated services charged to insurance companies and patients, government research grants claimed for unauthorized genetic studies, international wire transfers suggesting expansion plans. But the most damning discovery came when I accessed Dr. Jameson's personal financial records through a forensic accounting subpoena that our attorney had secured. He had purchased a private laboratory facility in Costa Rica, registered as an international reproductive research center with plans to offer advanced genetic optimization services to wealthy international clients. Dr. Jameson wasn't just conducting unauthorized experiments on American families, he was building an international network for genetic manipulation targeting vulnerable couples worldwide. The financial fraud also revealed the depth of his surveillance operation. Monthly payments to private investigation firms, data collection services, and educational consultants showed that Dr. Jameson had been systematically tracking his biological children for years, gathering information for his research while their families remained unaware. I discovered payments to schools for consultation services that were actually information gathering about his children's academic performance. Payments to pediatric practices for research collaboration that involved accessing medical records without parental consent. Even payments to social media monitoring services that tracked his biological children's online activities. The violation was complete. Dr. Jameson had not only stolen these families' reproductive choices and genetic legacy, he had been secretly studying their children like laboratory specimens while charging them for the privilege of being deceived. As I compiled the financial evidence into a comprehensive report, I realized we had built a case that went far beyond medical malpractice or fertility fraud. This was organized crime on an international scale, involving money laundering, insurance fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized human experimentation. The reunion event Dr. Jameson had planned wasn't just a celebration. It was likely the culmination of his research project, where he intended to gather data on all his biological children simultaneously before expanding his operation internationally. But now we had the evidence to stop him. Financial records, testimony from former employees, DNA evidence, and documented proof of systematic deception spanning 15 years and involving dozens of families. The time had come to take our case to law enforcement and ensure that Dr. Arnold Jameson's criminal empire would be destroyed before he could victimize another family. The first meeting of what would become known as the Jameson Victims Coalition took place in the community room of our local library on a cold December evening. 15 families attended, representing 23 children ranging in age from 18 months to 22 years. When I looked around the room, I saw the faces of parents who had lived with secrets, children who had questioned their identities, and siblings who were meeting for the first time. Emma Patterson had coordinated most of the outreach, using her network of DNA matches and social media connections to locate families across Southern California. Each family brought their own evidence: financial records, medical files, correspondence from Dr. Jameson, and photographs that documented the unmistakable family resemblances among children who shared no legal connection. "Before we begin," I said, addressing the group from the front of the room, "I want everyone to understand that what we're building here isn't just a support group. We're creating a coalition that will hold Dr. Arnold Jameson accountable for 15 years of systematic deception and help ensure that no other families suffer what we've endured." The stories that emerged over the next 3 hours painted a horrifying picture of coordinated manipulation. The Martinez family had spent their life savings on Dr. Jameson's treatments, borrowing against their home and depleting their retirement funds. Their 10-year-old son Carlos had been receiving developmental assessments from Dr. Jameson every 6 months since birth, disguised as continued care but actually surveillance for his genetic research. Rebecca and Tom Erickson shared how Dr. Jameson had convinced them to participate in a longitudinal family wellness study that involved detailed questionnaires about their daughter's academic performance, social development, and extracurricular achievements. They had trusted his expertise and felt honored to contribute to medical research, never realizing they were providing data about his biological child for his eugenic experiments. "He made us feel special," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "Like our family had been chosen for something important." When Sophie showed exceptional musical talent, Dr. Jameson acted like a proud grandfather. "We thought it was wonderful that our fertility doctor cared so much about her development." The pattern was consistent across every family. Dr. Jameson had maintained relationships with his victims for years, gathering intelligence about his biological children while positioning himself as a caring physician who went above and beyond for his patients. Parents had welcomed his continued involvement, grateful for the miracle pregnancies he had provided, and trusting his medical expertise. Emma Patterson stood to address the group, her 17-year-old voice carrying remarkable authority. "We need to understand that we're not just individual families who were deceived," she said. "We're participants in a genetic experiment that Dr. Jameson has been conducting for nearly 2 decades. Our children are research subjects in a study we never consented to participate in." I watched as that reality settled over the room. These weren't random fertility fraud cases. They were connected components of a systematic research project that violated every principle of medical ethics and human rights. "What's our legal standing?" asked David Abernathy, father of 14-year-old twin boys who had been conceived during Dr. Jameson's final year at Reproductive Health Associates. "Can we pursue criminal charges or are we limited to civil lawsuits?" "Both," I replied, consulting my notes. Dr. Jameson has committed multiple federal crimes, wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and violations of research ethics that could constitute human experimentation without consent. The FBI will handle criminal prosecution, but we can also pursue civil damages for financial losses, emotional trauma, and violation of reproductive rights. The financial impact across all families was staggering. Collectively, we had paid Dr. Jameson over $3.2 million for treatments that involved systematic deception. But the emotional and psychological damage was incalculable. Children questioning their identities, parents struggling with guilt and violation, and families rebuilding relationships based on truth rather than lies. "There's something else we need to discuss," said Jennifer Patterson, Emma's mother. "Dr. Jameson's holiday reunion event is scheduled for next week. Several families received invitations, and we need to decide how to handle this opportunity." The reunion invitation had reached 12 families, described as a celebration of Dr. Jameson's most successful cases and their exceptional children. The language was manipulative and disturbing, but it also represented a unique opportunity to gather evidence and confront Dr. Jameson with united testimony. "I think we should attend," Emma said firmly. "Not to celebrate, but to expose him. If we coordinate our approach, we can document his reaction when confronted with the truth, gather evidence of his surveillance network, and show other families who might be there what they're really participating in." The room erupted in discussion. Some parents were terrified of confronting Dr. Jameson directly, worried about legal retaliation or emotional trauma to their children. Others were eager for the opportunity to face the man who had violated their trust and demand answers. "If we do this, we need to be strategic," I said, bringing the group back to focus. "We'll need legal protection, media coordination, and careful planning to ensure everyone's safety. This can't be an emotional confrontation. It needs to be a calculated exposure of his crimes." Justin stepped forward to address logistical concerns. "I can coordinate with law enforcement to ensure we have protection at the event. We also need to consider whether to involve the media directly or document everything ourselves for later release." As the meeting concluded, we had established the framework for what would become a coordinated effort to expose Dr. Jameson's crimes. Families committed to sharing financial records, medical documentation, and testimony. Emma volunteered to coordinate communication among the children who were old enough to understand and participate in the legal process. But most importantly, we had transformed from isolated victims into a unified coalition with the power to seek justice and prevent future families from suffering similar violations. "One last thing," I said as families prepared to leave. "We're not just fighting for ourselves. Emma's research suggests that Dr. Jameson was planning to expand his operation internationally. If we don't stop him now, he could victimize families around the world." The weight of that responsibility settled over the room. We weren't just seeking personal justice, we were potentially preventing a global expansion of genetic manipulation and reproductive fraud. As families exchanged contact information and scheduled follow-up meetings, I felt the investigation entering its final phase. We had evidence, testimony, and a coalition strong enough to challenge Dr. Jameson's criminal empire. The reunion event would be our opportunity to end his deception and ensure that justice was finally served. The call from FBI Special Agent Patricia Miles came 2 days after our coalition meeting. When she introduced herself over the phone, I thought for a moment that sharing my surname was an odd coincidence, until she explained that she'd been investigating fertility fraud cases across multiple states for the past 3 years, and my name had appeared in federal databases as someone conducting parallel research into the same patterns. "Mrs. Miles, we've been tracking Dr. Arnold Jameson's financial activities through FinCEN reports for 18 months, Agent Miles explained during our first meeting at the FBI field office in San Diego. His shell companies and international wire transfers flagged our attention, but we didn't have direct evidence of the underlying crimes until your coalition came forward." She spread files across the conference table, documents that revealed Dr. Jameson was part of a larger network of fertility doctors suspected of similar crimes across 4 states. The scope was breathtaking and terrifying. "Dr. Jameson has been communicating with physicians in Colorado, Texas, and New York, who appear to be operating similar schemes," Agent Miles continued. "We believe this is a coordinated network of genetic fraud that spans the entire country, possibly involving hundreds of families and thousands of children." Justin and I exchanged glances. What we'd thought was an isolated case in San Diego was actually part of a national conspiracy of reproductive manipulation. What's our role in the federal investigation? I asked. You've provided the breakthrough we needed, Agent Miles replied. Your financial analysis, combined with testimony from former employees and your victim coalition, gives us enough evidence to secure warrants for Dr. Jameson's complete records and coordinate simultaneous raids on all suspected clinic locations, but she had a specific request that would require careful coordination. We want to use Dr. Jameson's reunion event as an opportunity to gather additional evidence and potentially arrest him in the presence of multiple victims. This would send a clear message to other doctors in the network and provide maximum impact for prosecution. The plan she outlined was both brilliant and risky. FBI agents would attend the reunion undercover, documenting Dr. Jameson's interactions with families and recording any admissions about his research project. Meanwhile, victim families would wear recording devices and follow a scripted approach to elicit incriminating statements. We need to involve the media strategically, Agent Miles continued. This case will likely become national news, and we want to control the narrative to encourage other victims to come forward while protecting the children's privacy. She introduced us to Maria Santos, an investigative journalist from the Los Angeles Times who specialized in medical fraud cases. Maria had been tracking fertility fraud patterns independently and was eager to collaborate on exposing the network. This story has the potential to transform reproductive medicine oversight, Maria explained during our first meeting. If we can prove that multiple doctors have been operating coordinated genetic experiments, it will force Congress to implement federal regulation of fertility clinics that's been lacking for decades. But Maria also understood the delicate balance required to protect the children involved. We can expose the crimes without sensationalizing the victims. The focus needs to be on the doctor's deception and the systemic failures that allowed this to happen, not on the personal trauma of individual families. Over the following week, we developed a comprehensive media strategy that would maximize impact while maintaining dignity for affected families. Emma Patterson, despite her age, emerged as a remarkably articulate spokesperson who could represent the children's perspective without exploitation. I want other kids like me to know they're not alone, Emma said during a practice interview with Maria. This isn't about shame or family secrets, it's about a doctor who committed crimes and needs to face justice. We're strong enough to tell our story and help prevent this from happening to other families. The reunion event planning became increasingly complex as we coordinated between the FBI, our legal team, the victim coalition, and media coverage. Dr. Jameson had booked the entire La Jolla resort for the evening, expecting approximately 40 families to attend what he called a celebration of miracles. He's planned this as the culmination of his research project, Agent Miles explained during our final preparation meeting. Intelligence suggests he intends to announce his findings about genetic optimization and possibly recruit families for an expanded international program. The hubris was staggering. Dr. Jameson was planning to use his victims' presence as validation for his crimes and a launching pad for global expansion. 3 days before the reunion, we received unexpected assistance from an international source. Dr. Luis Rodriguez from the Costa Rican Ministry of Health contacted Agent Miles with information about Dr. Jameson's facility there. Dr. Jameson has been advertising advanced reproductive services to wealthy couples from across Latin America, Dr. Rodriguez explained via video conference. When we investigated his licenses and credentials, we discovered multiple irregularities. We believe he was planning to begin operations within 6 months. The international dimension added urgency to our timeline. If Dr. Jameson suspected he was under investigation, he might flee to Costa Rica where extradition would be complicated, and he could continue victimizing families beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement. We have one chance to get this right, Agent Miles emphasized during our final briefing. The reunion event gives us the opportunity to arrest Dr. Jameson, gather evidence from his research files, and expose the entire network simultaneously. But if something goes wrong, if he becomes suspicious and flees, we might lose him permanently. As I prepared for what would be the most important evening of our investigation, I thought about all the families who had trusted Dr. Jameson with their dreams of parenthood, children who deserved to know their true origins, parents who had been violated in the most intimate way possible. The reunion wasn't going to be the celebration Dr. Jameson had planned. It was going to be his reckoning. Maria Santos would be positioned outside the resort with her camera crew, ready to broadcast the story as it unfolded. FBI agents would be stationed throughout the venue, coordinating arrests and evidence collection. Our victim coalition would be equipped with recording devices and prepared to confront the man who had stolen our choices and violated our trust. Tomorrow night, Arnold Jameson's 15 years of deception would finally come to an end. But first, we had to execute the most carefully orchestrated confrontation in the history of medical fraud prosecution. The breakthrough that would provide the final piece of evidence came from the most unexpected source, Ginger Abernathy herself. 3 days before the reunion event, she walked into the FBI field office carrying 2 large boxes and a flash drive that contained what she called 15 years of insurance against Dr. Jameson. I was present for her debriefing at Agent Miles' request, since my forensic accounting background would help interpret the financial documents she'd been secretly copying for over a decade. When Ginger entered the conference room, I was struck by how much older she looked than during our clinic visits, as if maintaining Dr. Jameson's secrets had aged her beyond her years. "I've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions," Ginger began, her voice steady but haunted. "When Agent Miles contacted me about the federal investigation, I knew it was finally time to tell the truth about what I've witnessed." Agent Miles activated her recording equipment as Ginger opened the first box, revealing meticulously organized files that represented the most comprehensive documentation of medical fraud I'd ever seen. "I started keeping copies in 2008 after I realized what Dr. Jameson was really doing," Ginger explained. "As his billing coordinator, I had access to everything: patient files, financial records, laboratory reports, even his personal research notes. When I understood the scope of his deception, I knew someday this evidence would be needed." The files were extraordinary in their detail. Ginger had documented every instance of sample substitution, every fabricated billing entry, every false insurance claim, and every payment to his surveillance network. But more importantly, she had copies of Dr. Jameson's personal research files that revealed the true purpose behind his genetic experiment. "Dr. Jameson believes he's conducting revolutionary research in human genetic optimization," Ginger said, pulling out a thick folder labeled Project Genesis. "He's convinced that by using his own genetic material, he's creating a superior generation of humans who will advance the species." This wasn't just fraud, it was a eugenic experiment disguised as fertility treatment. I examined the Project Genesis files with growing horror. Dr. Jameson had detailed profiles on every child he'd fathered, tracking their development from birth through adolescence. Academic achievements, physical development, psychological assessments, even social interactions were documented with scientific precision. "He has files on 67 children total," Ginger continued, "all conceived using his genetic material, all tracked without their family's knowledge, and all categorized by what he calls optimization outcomes. He was preparing to publish research claiming that his genetic intervention produced superior offspring." Agent Miles leaned forward. "Ginger, why did you participate in this deception for so long if you knew it was wrong?" Ginger's composure cracked slightly. "Dr. Jameson made it clear that exposing him would destroy not just my career, but my family's financial security. My husband Patrick worked for one of Dr. Jameson's shell companies, and our daughter's college tuition was being paid through research grants that didn't actually exist. We were financially trapped in his web of lies." The mention of Patrick Hendricks connected another piece of the conspiracy puzzle. Ginger's husband had been managing the Genetic Advancement Laboratory, one of Dr. Jameson's shell companies, without realizing he was laundering money from fraudulent fertility treatments. "But there's something else," Ginger said, opening the second box. "Dr. Jameson wasn't working alone. He's been collaborating with fertility doctors in other states, sharing research data and coordinating similar experiments. This network involves at least 12 physicians across the country." She showed us communication records between Dr. Jameson and doctors in Colorado, Texas, New York, and Florida. The emails discussed optimization protocols, genetic enhancement research, and expanding the subject population, clinical language that barely disguised their coordinated scheme to father children without parental consent. "The reunion event isn't just a celebration," Ginger revealed. "Jameson is planning to announce his research findings and recruit some of the older children to participate in what he calls Phase 2, a study that would involve genetic testing, psychological evaluation, and potentially using them as breeding subjects for the next generation of his experiment." My blood ran cold at the implication. Dr. Jameson wasn't just studying his biological children, he was planning to use them to continue his genetic manipulation into the next generation. "Ginger, what finally made you decide to come forward?" I asked. "Emma Patterson," she replied simply. "When she started contacting families and building her network, I realized the children were old enough to understand what had been done to them. They deserved the truth, and they deserved justice. I couldn't live with the guilt anymore." The flash drive Ginger provided contained digital copies of everything: patient databases, financial records, research files, and communication logs that documented 15 years of systematic deception. But most damaging were Dr. Jameson's personal video logs, recorded sessions where he discussed his research with disturbing enthusiasm. These videos show Dr. Jameson explaining his genetic superiority theories and celebrating successful optimizations, Ginger explained. He recorded them as documentation for his planned research publication. They're essentially confessions of everything he's done. Agent Miles immediately secured the evidence for laboratory analysis and digital forensics. Ginger, this documentation provides the foundation for prosecuting not just Dr. Jameson, but the entire network of doctors involved in this conspiracy. But Ginger had one final revelation that would change our understanding of the reunion event entirely. Dr. Jameson has invited researchers from international fertility organizations to attend tomorrow night, she said quietly. He's planning to present his findings as a breakthrough in human genetic enhancement and seek funding for global expansion. The reunion isn't just about celebrating past successes, it's about launching a worldwide genetic manipulation program. The stakes had escalated beyond anything we'd imagined. Dr. Jameson wasn't just planning to continue his crimes, he was preparing to franchise his genetic experiment to fertility clinics around the world. We have to stop him tomorrow night, Agent Miles said firmly. If he successfully presents his research to international investors, this conspiracy could expand globally before we can coordinate international law enforcement response. As our meeting concluded, I felt the weight of responsibility for dozens of families and potentially thousands of future victims. Ginger's evidence provided everything we needed to destroy Dr. Jameson's operation, but we had less than 24 hours to execute the most complex medical fraud prosecution in FBI history. Tomorrow night at the La Jolla Resort, Dr. Arnold Jameson would finally face justice for 15 years of systematic deception. But more importantly, we would prevent his genetic manipulation scheme from spreading worldwide and victimizing families across the globe. The evidence cache Ginger had provided wasn't just documentation of past crimes, it was our roadmap for stopping a potential genetic catastrophe before it could begin. The morning of the reunion, our coalition gathered at the FBI field office for final preparations. The conference room looked like a military command center: surveillance equipment, recording devices, legal documents, and communication gear spread across multiple tables while Agent Miles coordinated with field teams across 4 states. Today we're not just confronting Dr. Jameson. Agent Miles addressed our group of 15 families. We're executing simultaneous operations that will dismantle an entire network of genetic fraud. While we're gathering evidence at the reunion, FBI teams in Colorado, Texas, and New York will be raiding the affiliated clinics and arresting the collaborating physicians. Emma Patterson, now wearing a small recording device concealed in her jewelry, had emerged as our de facto spokesperson for the confrontation. Despite being only 17, she demonstrated remarkable composure as she reviewed the strategic plan we'd developed. The key is getting Dr. Jameson to discuss his research openly, Emma explained to the other children who would be attending. He's proud of what he thinks he's accomplished. If we ask the right questions about our exceptional development and genetic advantages, he'll likely reveal details about the deception. Justin checked his own recording equipment while reviewing the floor plan of the La Jolla Resort ballroom. FBI agents would be positioned as resort staff, photographers, and even fake family members attending the celebration. Every conversation would be documented, every admission recorded, and every piece of evidence preserved for prosecution. Mrs. Miles, what happens if Dr. Jameson becomes suspicious before we can gather enough evidence? Asked Rebecca Erickson, mother of 15-year-old Sophie. We have contingency plans, Agent Miles replied. If the situation becomes compromised, we'll move to immediate arrest rather than risk losing him. But ideally, we want him to incriminate himself completely before we reveal the investigation. The psychological profile FBI behavioral analysts had developed suggested Dr. Jameson's narcissism would work in our favor. His belief in his genetic superiority and scientific achievements made him likely to boast about his research when surrounded by what he considered his greatest successes. He sees you as validation of his theories, Dr. Sarah Kim, the FBI's consulting psychologist, explained to our group. The children represent proof of his genetic enhancement hypothesis. He'll want to study you, document your achievements, and potentially recruit you for future research. That's when he'll be most vulnerable to making admissions. I reviewed my own role in the confrontation strategy. As the forensic accountant who had initially uncovered the financial fraud, I would be responsible for eliciting admissions about the billing deception and money laundering through his shell companies. Dr. Jameson trusts you because he believes you're a grateful patient, Agent Miles reminded me. When you ask about the financial aspects of his research and international expansion plans, frame it as curiosity about how such innovative work gets funded. The technical team conducted final equipment checks, ensuring that every recording device was functioning properly and that backup systems were in place. Maria Santos coordinated with her camera crew stationed outside the resort, prepared to broadcast the story as soon as arrests were made. Remember, Agent Miles emphasized as we prepared to leave for the resort, this isn't about revenge or personal satisfaction. This is about justice for dozens of families and preventing Dr. Jameson from expanding his operation globally. Stay focused on gathering evidence and following the plan. As our convoy departed for the La Jolla resort, I felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. Tonight we would finally confront the man who had violated our trust and stolen our reproductive choices. But more importantly, we would ensure that his genetic manipulation scheme ended permanently. The reunion that Dr. Jameson had planned as a celebration of his scientific achievements would instead become the evening when his 15 years of deception finally collapsed. The La Jolla Resort ballroom had been transformed into Dr. Jameson's vision of triumph. Elegant tables arranged around a central presentation area, professional photographers documenting every moment, and displays showcasing his research achievements. As our coalition entered the venue, I felt like we were walking into the lion's den, but this time we were the hunters. Dr. Jameson stood near the entrance greeting families with the same warm smile and confident handshake that had once made us feel so grateful. Watching him embrace children he had fathered through deception while their unsuspecting parents beamed with pride made my skin crawl. Scarlett, Justin, and beautiful Ruby, Dr. Jameson exclaimed as we approached. Look how magnificent she's grown. Those exceptional genetics are expressing themselves perfectly. I forced a smile while my hidden recording device captured every word. Dr. Jameson, we're so grateful for this celebration. Ruby's development has been remarkable, exactly as you predicted. His eyes lit up with scientific pride. Superior genetic material produces superior results. Ruby represents the future of human optimization. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Wait until you see what I'm announcing tonight. The research data is extraordinary. Emma Patterson moved through the crowd with remarkable composure, engaging Dr. Jameson in conversations designed to elicit admissions about his surveillance network. I watched her approach him near the display of children's photographs, a grotesque gallery of his biological offspring presented as research specimens. Dr. Jameson, I'm so curious about your research methodology, Emma said with practiced innocence. How have you been able to track our development so comprehensively over the years? Dr. Jameson's narcissism made him eager to explain his scientific approach. Longitudinal monitoring is essential for genetic research, he replied, gesturing toward the photo displays. I've maintained detailed developmental profiles on each subject: academic performance, physical characteristics, psychological assessments. The data proves conclusively that genetic optimization produces measurably superior outcomes. I moved closer with my recording device as he continued. The beauty of the system is that families welcome the continued involvement. They're so grateful for their miracle babies that they enthusiastically participate in follow-up assessments without realizing they're contributing to groundbreaking research. Emma pressed further. Have you been coordinating with other fertility specialists on similar research? Absolutely, Dr. Jameson said proudly. I've been collaborating with colleagues in Colorado, Texas, and New York who share my vision of genetic enhancement. Together, we've created the largest dataset of optimized human development in medical history. Across the room, I watched other families engaging in similar conversations, each recording device capturing admissions that would form the foundation of federal prosecution. Dr. Jameson's arrogance made him vulnerable. He couldn't resist sharing details about his research with people he considered fellow beneficiaries of his genetic superiority. The evening's formal presentation began with Dr. Jameson taking the stage, a PowerPoint display showing charts and graphs behind him. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, and most importantly, my exceptional families, tonight marks a historic moment in reproductive medicine. He gestured toward the assembled children. These remarkable young people represent the first generation of genetically optimized humans, Through advanced reproductive techniques and superior genetic material, we've achieved outcomes that surpass traditional conception by every measurable standard. The room fell silent as he continued, completely unaware that FBI agents were positioned throughout the venue recording his confession. Intelligence quotients averaging 15 points above population norms, physical development exceeding standard growth charts, academic achievements placing 93% in gifted programs. My heart pounded as I realized Dr. Jameson was about to reveal the full scope of his deception to a room full of his victims and federal agents. "The success of our domestic program has attracted international attention," he announced, advancing to a slide showing global expansion plans. "Beginning next month, we'll be launching similar optimization programs in Costa Rica, serving clients throughout Latin America and the Caribbean." That was the moment Agent Miles had been waiting for. Clear admission of international conspiracy and plans for continued genetic manipulation. I saw her signal to agents positioned around the room. Dr. Jameson was still speaking when the ballroom doors opened and additional FBI agents entered. "Tonight represents not just a celebration of past achievements, but the launch of a global revolution in human genetic enhancement. Dr. Arnold Jameson, you're under arrest." The transformation in Dr. Jameson's face when Agent Miles announced his arrest was like watching a mask disintegrate. The confident scientist became a cornered predator in seconds, his eyes darting around the ballroom as FBI agents moved into position and the full scope of his exposure became clear. "There's been some mistake," he stammered, stepping back from the podium as Agent Miles approached with handcuffs. "I'm conducting legitimate medical research. These families are here celebrating our shared successes." Emma Patterson stepped forward, her 17-year-old voice cutting through the tension with remarkable clarity. "Dr. Jameson, we're here because we discovered the truth about your genetic experiment. All of us. We know what you've been doing." I watched his face cycle through confusion, realization, and finally a cold calculation as he understood that his victims had become his prosecutors. The children he'd been studying like laboratory specimens were confronting him with evidence of his crimes. "You don't understand the significance of what I've accomplished," Dr. Jameson said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "Look around this room. Every child here represents a genetic advancement that wouldn't have existed without my intervention. Their intelligence, their physical capabilities, their potential, all enhanced through my optimization protocols." Agent Miles continued reading his rights while families around the room watched in stunned silence. Some parents were hearing the truth about their children's parentage for the first time, having attended the reunion unaware of the investigation. "I gave these families miracles," Dr. Jameson continued, his scientific arrogance overriding any sense of self-preservation. "Couples who would have remained childless, men whose genetic material was inadequate, I provided them with superior alternatives. Every child in this room is proof of my success." The recording devices were capturing every word of his twisted justification. Emma stepped closer, her questions designed to elicit more specific admissions. "How many children have you fathered without their parents' consent?" she asked directly. Dr. Jameson's composure finally cracked completely. "Consent? I gave them children who exceed every developmental benchmark. Ruby Miles has an IQ of 147. Carlos Martinez is competing at national levels in mathematics competitions. Sophie Erickson has been accepted to Juilliard at 15. Without my genetic contribution, none of these achievements would exist." The room erupted as parents processed what they were hearing. Justin grabbed my hand as we listened to Dr. Jameson reduce our children to data points in his research project. "You've been tracking our children for years," I said, my forensic training helping me maintain composure, "documenting their development, gathering intelligence about their achievements, all without our knowledge or consent. Longitudinal studies require comprehensive data collection," he replied, as if explaining basic science to children. "I've maintained detailed files on 67 subjects across 15 years. The research will revolutionize our understanding of genetic optimization." Agent Miles had heard enough. "Dr. Arnold Jameson, you're charged with multiple counts of fertility fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit international medical fraud." But Dr. Jameson wasn't finished. Even as handcuffs were placed on his wrists, his narcissism demanded he defend his research. "You're destroying 15 years of groundbreaking research," he shouted, as agents began escorting him toward the exit. The international fertility community was prepared to fund global expansion. "We could have enhanced the genetic quality of populations worldwide. We could have prevented this madness worldwide," Emma replied coldly. That's exactly why we stopped you. As Dr. Jameson was led from the ballroom, the magnitude of what had just transpired settled over the room. 15 years of systematic deception had ended with his complete confession in front of dozens of witnesses and federal agents. But the evening wasn't over. Agent Miles addressed the families still processing the shock of the arrest. For those of you who weren't aware of the investigation, I understand this is overwhelming, she said gently. FBI Victim Services coordinators are here to explain what's happened and help you understand your options moving forward. I looked around the ballroom at families whose lives had just been forever changed. Children learning they weren't who they thought they were. Parents realizing they'd been deceived in the most intimate way possible. But also a community finding strength in shared truth rather than individual lies. The confrontation had achieved everything we'd hoped. Complete confession, documented evidence, and the end of Dr. Jameson's genetic manipulation scheme. Within hours of Dr. Jameson's arrest, the coordinated FBI operation across 4 states had dismantled the entire fertility fraud network. Agent Miles coordinated the aftermath from a command center set up at the resort, while Maria Santos broadcast live coverage that would make the story international news by morning. Simultaneous raids in Colorado, Texas, and New York have resulted in the arrest of 4 additional fertility doctors. Agent Miles announced to our coalition, which had remained at the resort to provide witness testimony, Dr. Marcus Reed in Denver, Dr. Amanda Foster in Houston, Dr. James Chen in Dallas, and Dr. Elizabeth Wagner in Albany are all in federal custody facing identical charges. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. The network had operated across state lines for over a decade, with each doctor using similar deception techniques while sharing research data and financial resources through Dr. Jameson's shell companies. How many families were affected nationwide? Emma Patterson asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what we were learning. Preliminary estimates suggest over 300 families and more than 400 children, Agent Miles replied grimly. Each clinic was using the same optimization protocols, sample substitution methods, and surveillance networks that Dr. Jameson developed here in San Diego. I watched families around the room processing the realization that their experience wasn't unique, that hundreds of other families had suffered identical violations across the country. But there was also strength in knowing they weren't alone, that this was a systemic crime rather than isolated incidents. The financial investigation team had frozen all assets associated with the network's shell companies, including the Costa Rican facility that would have launched international operations. Dr. Jameson's personal accounts, real estate holdings, and research equipment were all seized as evidence and potential restitution for victim families. What happens to the international investors who were planning to fund the expansion? Justin asked. Several attendees at tonight's presentation have already contacted the FBI offering cooperation, Agent Miles explained. They claim they had no knowledge of the deceptive practices and thought they were investing in legitimate genetic research. We'll determine their level of involvement through the investigation. The most immediate concern was protecting the children whose identities and family relationships had been fundamentally altered by the revelations. FBI Victim Services had psychologists on site to provide crisis counseling, while social workers helped families navigate the complex emotional aftermath. Will the children's birth certificates need to be changed? Asked Rebecca Erickson, holding her daughter Sophie close. That's a legal question each family will need to address individually, Agent Miles replied. The biological facts don't change the legal relationships you've built, but some families may choose to pursue paternity modifications for inheritance or medical history purposes. Ginger Abernathy, Dr. Jameson's former billing coordinator who had provided crucial evidence, approached me during a break in the debriefing. Mrs. Miles, I want you to know that watching those children confront Dr. Motz tonight gave me more satisfaction than 15 years of keeping his secrets ever could, she said, tears in her eyes. They were magnificent, strong, articulate, and completely unafraid of him. The criminal charges against Dr. Jameson and his network were extensive. Federal prosecutors were pursuing wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, identity theft, and violations of medical research ethics that could result in decades in prison for each defendant. The financial fraud alone totals over $43 million across all clinics, the lead prosecutor explained. But the human impact, the violation of reproductive autonomy and family integrity, makes this one of the most serious medical crimes we've ever prosecuted. As dawn approached and families began leaving the resort, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from our initial suspicions to this moment of comprehensive justice. What had started as questions about Ruby's genetic testing had exposed a national conspiracy that violated hundreds of families. But more importantly, we had prevented Dr. Jameson's scheme from expanding internationally and potentially victimizing thousands more families worldwide. Emma Patterson, who had emerged as the voice of affected children throughout the investigation, made a final statement to the media before leaving. "Tonight proved that truth is stronger than deception, that victims can become advocates, and that justice is possible even against the most powerful institutions," she said confidently. Dr. Jameson thought he was creating superior children through genetic manipulation. Instead, he created a generation strong enough to expose his crimes and ensure he faces the consequences. The investigation that had consumed our lives for months was finally over, but the healing process was just beginning. 6 months after Dr. Jameson's arrest, I stood in Ruby's nursery watching her play with blocks, marveling at how much our family had healed while rebuilding on a foundation of truth rather than deception. The federal trial had concluded 2 weeks earlier, with Dr. Jameson receiving a life sentence without possibility of parole, a verdict that brought closure to hundreds of families across the nation. The Jameson Victims Coalition had evolved into a powerful advocacy organization, lobbying Congress for comprehensive fertility clinic regulation and supporting families affected by reproductive fraud. Emma Patterson, now 18 and headed to Stanford on a pre-law scholarship, had become the public face of legislative reform efforts. The Genetic Fraud Prevention Act we're proposing will require mandatory DNA verification for all fertility procedures, Emma explained during her testimony before a congressional subcommittee. "No family should ever experience what we endured, and no doctor should have the opportunity to commit these crimes again." Justin and I had found peace in our redefined family structure. Ruby was thriving, and while the truth about her biological origins had been difficult to process, it hadn't diminished our love for her or our commitment to providing her with a stable, honest upbringing. The financial restitution from seized assets had allowed affected families to access genetic counseling, psychological support, and educational resources for their children. More importantly, the national attention had encouraged dozens of additional families to come forward with similar experiences, leading to investigations of fertility clinics in 12 more states. Dr. Jameson's Costa Rican facility had been permanently shuttered, and international cooperation agreements now required genetic verification protocols for cross-border fertility services. The global expansion of his genetic manipulation scheme had been prevented before it could begin. On Ruby's 3rd birthday, we celebrated with several families from our coalition, including Emma's family and others who had become extended relatives through shared experience rather than genetics. The children played together while parents reflected on how truth had ultimately made our families stronger. "Mrs. Miles," Emma said as the celebration concluded, "I want to thank you for being brave enough to investigate when something didn't feel right. If you hadn't trusted your instincts and used your professional skills to expose Dr. Jameson, he'd still be victimizing families and planning international expansion." As I tucked Ruby into bed that night, I whispered the promise I'd made when this journey began. "You'll grow up knowing that when people tried to steal our choices and violate our trust, your family fought back and won. Truth is always stronger than deception, and justice is always worth fighting for." The investigation that began with a routine genetic test had not only brought a monster to justice, it had created a movement that would protect families for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.